So here we go, guys. We are in week 3 on our series on dating. Let me just take a moment and pray, and then we'll get started. God, I thank you so much for just our time together, for the group that you've given us. Lord, I pray that you would help us to look at your word, to see what it says, that you would open our eyes to it, that we'd be willing to listen. I just thank you for how good you are to us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so as we get into this and as we get into the topic of dating, third week in it, dating in our culture tends to be different than other relationships, right?
Yeah. I wasn't here last week. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, well, we'll catch you up along the way. But it tends to be different than a lot of other relationships. Like, you might have good relationships with friends, but when it comes to dating, like for those of you guys who have dated, for interested in dating, maybe those of you guys who aren't interested, but you're like, maybe one day down the line, I might be interested. This series is kind of for you, and it's dealing with a lot of how we interact with each other in relationships. But especially when it comes to dating relationships, they function a little differently than other relationships. How many of you guys have ever seen this? It's easier to see someone who loses common sense in their dating relationship. Anybody ever seen that? To where like all of a sudden it's like this person, like they stand for this and they're really passionate about this, and all of a sudden they start dating and like everything changes about what they're deeply passionate about. Wow. And all of a sudden it's like common sense stuff like just kind of goes out the window, and it happens to all of us. When someone can't see a situation clearly, they make choices they wouldn't otherwise make. Now that's true in any relationship. When you can't see it clearly, it's tough to make good, wise decisions. But sometimes in a dating relationship, it's even harder because you got feelings, emotions, love, like it's all there. And if we're honest, we tend to have general rules when it comes to dating. And even if you aren't dating, but someday you might, you still have some rules that you will live by. Maybe I'll share a couple of them that I think most of you, like on a common sense day, you'd all agree with. Like, should you date somebody who's a cheater?
No. Maybe. If you're a cheater, it makes sense.
See, we'll talk about that. All right. But here's the thing. Most of you would probably say no, right? Probably shouldn't date a cheater. All right. Don't date someone who brings you down or treats you poorly. On a common sense day, would you be like, you know what? I want to find the person that treats me the worst and date them. Common sense day, would you make that statement? No. Okay, good. I won't date somebody who pulls me away from good relationships. Meaning, like, I have good relationships with my parents, with my friends, but once we get into that relationship, they just want me to themselves, and they don't let me have any other types of relationships. Now, on a common sense day, we'd be like, no, we probably shouldn't be in a relationship like that, right? Do you ever see that happen in the dating world, right? It's like common sense goes out the window. For those of you who would say that you're followers of Jesus, that we wouldn't date someone who pulls away from God or godly values. And yet, what we see oftentimes is common sense kind of goes out the window on some of those things. But when we actually start falling for someone and getting feelings and emotions involved, those rules tend to become a little more flexible, right? Is what I'm saying making sense?
Yeah, a lot.
You guys see it all over the place, don't you? Mm-hmm. All right. So the question here that we got to think through is, how do we deal with this? How do you fulfill your deepest desires? Because here's the thing. Like when you start dating somebody, it's not like you're like, oh, I hope this relationship stinks. And there's no satisfaction or joy in it at all.
So you're drinking it so it becomes good.
Yeah, so most of the time you don't venture into a relationship like that. You have deep desires within you that you want to see, like I'm sure you want to see satisfaction. But how do you fulfill your deepest desires and yet save your dating life from decisions you'll regret? How do we navigate this? How do we actually say, you know what, there are like this longing to be loved, this longing to have satisfaction in our life. How do we actually start to live out to where those can be fulfilled, and maybe fulfilled in a good way, but fulfilled in a way that we're not going to regret. If you got your Bibles, turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11. If you don't have one, go to the back and grab one. But 2 Samuel chapter 11, we're going to look at verses 1 through 3. If you've grown up in church, you've probably heard this story before. If you haven't grown up in church, this may be new. I'll say this. We're going to talk about King David. David is known as a man after God's own heart. God actually describes him that way. He's looked at as one of like the heroes of the Bible. And yeah, he's just kind of like an all-around awesome dude. He killed a giant with a stone. It's a pretty cool story. David's just awesome. He's killed a bear, killed a lion. Like, if there was dragons, he probably would have. Like, he was just that type of awesome dude. All right. He could play the harp, so like he was sentimental too and emotional. Like, he was a warrior and a kind soul. Here's the thing: David's like this dreamy, awesome guy, and this is what we're going to find out about David. So David is married at this point. He's the king over Israel. He is their warrior leader. And 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, this is what it says. In the spring, at the time when the kings go off to war. So what do the kings do?
Go to war.
They go to war. Okay, so this is when, like, you don't fight a battle in winter back then because you can't, like, survive. Like, it's freezing cold, okay? So, like, if you're going to have a war, like, it's springtime into summer. That way you have the longest amount of time to absolutely destroy your enemy. Yeah. So springtime is when, like, they would go out to war. So where are the kings supposed to be?
In the front of the line?
At minimum, out to war with their men. All right? So David sent Joab, who's actually out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rahab. But David remained in, where? Jerusalem. So David, instead of being out with his men, where is he?
Home.
He's home. Okay. Verse 2. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on his roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a beautiful woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. So, was she beautiful? It says it twice there, right? All right, she's bathing. It's the way the culture was set up. You could have like a bathing trough kind of thing like up on the roof. And all the houses kind of have like these terraces to where like there's covered walls. So like it's private. But the king's palace is taller than everywhere else. And so while it's private to all the neighbors, guess whose house it's not private to? David's. Now, this is cultural norm. So what Bathsheba is doing here is not unnormal, all right? But we don't know she's Bathsheba yet because we haven't read this. Verse 3. And David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." So we find out she's someone else's wife, and so David's not where he should be. And what we're going to find is he starts to ask the wrong question. Yes, a little bit. But here's the thing. As he's dealing with it, and as we're going through it, David asks the wrong question. And if you read the rest of the story, we find out he calls Bathsheba in, gets Bathsheba pregnant. And David tries everything he can to cover this whole thing up, to the point that he actually brings Bathsheba's husband home in hopes that they can spend some time together. But he's like, "No, my men are on the front lines. I can't go home like that." And David's so frustrated with the fact that he can't cover up something that he shouldn't have done, ends up sending Uriah back to the front lines and has him killed there. So here's this man after God's own heart. He sees another woman. He's like, "Ooh, I wonder who that is." Asks the wrong question. And then goes, gets her pregnant, tries to cover it up, and then kills her husband.
Where's his wife when this is happening?
David's wife?
Yeah.
They're around. I don't know. But here's the thing. David is starting to live out a life to where we don't see this question in the text, but we see it in the pattern of his life. He's asking this question: how far can I go?
Deeper.
And here's the funny thing. When it comes to dating relationships, most of the time that's the question we actually ask. when we start to lose common sense, it's like, oh, well, I mean, I think this would be okay, and I think this would be, oh, well, we love each other, and it's generally surrounding the idea of how far can we go. And if we're honest, that's the wrong question. And why is it the wrong question? Why is it a bad question to ask when you're dating? Even when you're married, when you're single. Why is this a bad question? Or why is it the wrong question? Well, three things. There's two negatives, and then I want to share one positive that is... If you don't catch anything, I want you to catch the positive tonight, because it might be the most crucial thing that you hear and understand as we go through this. So, here we go. So when we do this, when we start to ask the wrong question, we put ourselves in a bad spot. We put ourselves in a bad spot. In the middle of the situation, we can lose perspective or think we are the exception to the rule. So 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, at the first part of the verse, it says this. To flee, go ahead, put it up. It says to flee sexual immorality. We'll get into what that word even means, but do you guys catch the first word?
Flee?
Flee.
Like a dog flea?
No, not like a dog flea. Like get out of here as fast as you can. Do you see David do this? No. David's like, instead of fleeing, what does he do? He hangs around. David's in a spot to where he knows better, and he knows he should be fleeing out of this circumstance, but he doesn't. David should have run. Let me give you... I'll just run for it here. There's a question that I will get sometimes from teenagers. One of the questions that I'll get is, all right, so, like, is it really a sin, like, if we hang out in each other's bedrooms? Like, if you're dating? And what's the answer to that question? Is it really a sin if we hang out into each other's bedroom? Not necessarily.
As long as you're just like talking and sitting.
Yeah, so let me... Now here's the thing. Was it a sin for David to be home away from war?
I mean, no.
Not really. And was it even really a sin for him to be up on the rooftop?
No.
Not like Bathsheba was up on the rooftop. Like, is that a sin that she went and took a bath? Like we got to be careful here as we're starting to define some of these things. Like, you can never take a shower. That's sinful. I'm going to tell you, if you show up to youth group with that principle, we're going to have a conversation. But here's the thing. We start to ask some of these questions like, all right, well, how far can I go with this? And really, is it a sin to be in your boyfriend or girlfriend's bedroom? Well, not necessarily. But is that a bad spot to be in when temptation comes?
Meaning?
Like... Yeah, we're not going to go to meeting again. I see you baited me. Way to go. Is that a bad spot to be in? Because here's the thing. Temptation comes all the time, doesn't it? It really does. But when you're in a good spot, like if temptation comes here or in front of your parents, like it's pretty easy to go, no. But when you're alone with your boyfriend or girlfriend, it can be a little trickier, right? And do we put ourselves in spots to where we can flee and run, or do we put ourselves in spots to where, of course, this is going to be a bad spot, and of course, some of these things are going to happen? And so we put ourselves in bad spots. Here's the second one. We misuse others and ourselves. This one's a big one within the culture, and let me say this to you guys. This might be one of the more important things that I could say. Here, guys, go ahead and put the phone down for a second.
Yeah, bro, put the phones away.
I'm actually going to talk about phones here in just a second. Most of what you see on television and in culture, when it surrounds relationships, it's basically surrounding treating each other like commodities.
What's a commodity?
A commodity is something that you buy or you take. All right, so let me give you an example. Like with a phone. If when I went shopping for my phone, like I am looking for a phone that is reliable. I'm looking for a phone that has the best features. I'm looking for the phone that works best for me, that looks good. that it's not a problem to use. It's not got a lot of like system drama to it. Like it's good and it helps me. Now, is it wrong to look for a phone that way?
No.
Would it be wrong to look for a boyfriend or girlfriend or a spouse that way?
Yes.
It depends.
Yes.
See,
Well, wait,
and
no,
this is the catch.
You don't want to be with
This is
someone
the
like
catch.
that.
If you're talking about their looks, then yes, it's wrong. If you're talking about their personality, then
He just described a full
Wait.
personality.
I just described the phone's personality.
Yes.
See, here's the thing, guys. Most of the time we get caught in all of this. When in reality is we have to start to think about it, not in terms of like, all right, are we compatible and all that stuff. Most of the time when we talk about compatibility, where the problem comes in is we start to look at it and say, well, are you compatible to me? Do you make me feel good? Do you help me? Does this work with me? And so in other words, the other person is there as a commodity or something to be used for your benefit. Does that sound like you're misusing them?
Mm-hmm.
And does it sound like you're misusing even yourself in the way that God's even created you to be? See, a lot of times we treat ourselves and others as if they're commodities instead of as if they're created in the image of God. Let me put the verse up on the screen. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 18 and 19. It says, flee from sexual immorality. That word sexual immorality, the Greek word for it, and I know I don't normally tell you Greek words, but this one's actually helpful. The Greek word for it is it's the word porneia.
Meaning?
Can anybody guess maybe a word that comes off of it in our English language?
pornography.
Porn.
Wait,
This-
what is that?
Yeah. This
No.
word,
What is that?
we won't talk about that here. This
What
word,
is porn?
be quiet.
Oh my god.
You're baiting me the
You
whole
have
way.
to tell them what it means later.
No.
This
I know what it means.
this word basically means any type of sexual activity outside of God's design. Now let me finish reading the verse. It says, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body." So he's making a difference to where most of the time the way we think of sins, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm hurting somebody else. Okay, great. I might even hurt myself some, but he says, all right, in this category of sexuality, there is a difference in the way that it affects us. Do you not know that their bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? So this is anything outside of God's design, God's saying flee from. Now, that's probably not what culture says on a lot of this, right? It actually says run towards a lot of it, doesn't it?
What? When does it say that?
All the time. Here's maybe a statement I want you to think about. Because most of the time when we think about God, is you think like, all right, God says, hey, don't do that. But when God says don't, he's also saying don't hurt yourself. I don't want you to hurt yourself. Paul points out that sexual sins are not like any other sins. And here's the funny thing. Psychology is caught up with this. Most of the time when people talk about sexuality, they're like, well, it's just physical. Right? Like, it's just two people enjoying themselves. Like, it's just physical. There's nothing there. I'm going to make a fairly strong example here. But I think we all kind of know this. When there is abuse, when someone violates someone else, especially in this area, how come no one goes, it's just physical? Like, yeah, sure, like, you get a cut on your arm. Like, that hurts, okay, bandage it up, like, it might take a little time, but it's just physical, right?
So you
But-
mean mentally?
It's more than that. See, here's the thing. People who are violated and abused in these ways, there is deep emotional, mental pain and trauma that goes into it. Then why do we say on the other side, well, it's just physical, though? It's not. And God, even in the way that he's talking about it, he's pointing out, like, it's different. Go ahead and put the verse back up. Like, whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Like, something happens inside of you, inside of your soul, that God says, this is different. It's not just physical. And using sexuality outside of God's design affects the soul and it taints who you are. Ultimately, when we willfully enter into it, it taints who we are. And if we've ever experienced abuse, we haven't caused any of the tainting or anything like that, and we're not tainted. But here's the thing: do those people feel as if they've been violated and hurt? Yeah. And we have such a problem in our culture to where it treats people as if they're commodities. I just need to get something from you. I want something from you. And we surround it with love language, but it's really not about caring for the other person, because we all deep down even know, like, this is more than just physical. If you're a follower of Jesus, you have God living in you. Everywhere you go, you carry God. And this should affect the way that you view others. So let's talk about a few things. Pornography or lust. Do you know, with viewing pornography, you're starting to create an attachment and a judgment to something that is not real. And ultimately, like anything, you need more and more to fulfill yourself over time. And you're training yourself to compare to other people, comparing what people look like and using people that way. And you start to put pressure on others even in the future. If you get married and you've been viewing pornography for a while, you bring that into the relationship with you. And it starts to put pressure on the relationship because there's a comparing thing going back in your mind. You're training yourself over time that real is not good enough the way that God wants it to be. Whether it's just pleasuring yourself or sex outside of marriage or even sexting, when we think about it, all of those are centered around the value of just trying to draw something out from someone else, whether imaginary or real. And basically saying that you value the other person as if they're just a commodity. That it's just a physical act. But God wants you to know, like, it's something so much deeper. AJ?
How come people don't realize it's not good to just go have sex outside of marriage and stuff? Literally, I'll be scrolling through TikTok and so many people are teen moms now. They'll be in 10th or 11th grade and they'll be like, this is my baby and stuff like that. And I'll just be like, why would you do that to yourself?
So when I get to the positive, I'll actually explain that, because that's something that's happening within ourselves that we have to recognize. So maybe you're a person that you've experienced pressure from somebody else to do something. And you're like, well, but we really love each other. Honestly, if they love you, they won't be pressuring you, or you won't be pressuring the other person, and you'll be valuing the other person to the point to where if this is a line that you have to draw, do they really care about you, or do they just care what you get? If you're ever dating somebody and they're like, hey, let's, and it's crossing a line, and you say no, and they're like, oh, come on, you're starting to know right at that point. Wow, they don't actually care about me, they care about getting this from me. And here's the thing, that's common sense if we actually step back and think about it, but when you're in the moment and you're in love or you feel love for that person, it doesn't feel that way, does it? And you might be asking yourself, okay, well, what's at stake in this? Let's say I've thought about crossing the line, or I have crossed the line that God has said. What's at stake? Does God just flat reject me? Is there no redemption or hope for me? What's at stake? It's not forgiveness.
It's consequences.
It's consequences. See, here's the beautiful thing about it. No matter how far you go, God is always there saying, I forgive, and I can forgive, and I can restore. And I want you to get that hope. That you're not just hearing God say, hey, don't, hey, don't, hey, don't, and then you filthy, unclean, no. I want you to hear God. Jesus said, I came for sinners. And what are we all?
Sinners.
And he offers us forgiveness no matter what we've done. But here's the other thing. God says, hey, before you walk down that path, I'm saying, hey, stay with him for this because I don't want you to deal with the consequences. I mean, we haven't even gotten into all the STDs and stuff that can happen. And I'm not going to.
What is it?
Sean.
Never mind.
No, Sean.
Sean,
Here's the next one. How far can I go? And this is the last point I want to make, and this is maybe the most crucial one. So don't miss out on this. And this will lean into what you were talking about, AJ, with what people are doing. We miss out on true satisfaction. Here, nobody goes into any sort of relationship and they're like, you know what? This is a terrible idea. And everything we're about to do in this relationship is a terrible idea. And it's all going to work out terribly. Okay. Like, nobody does that. Like, common sense would say, all right, there's a lot of stuff here that probably shouldn't, or like if we looked at some of this, we shouldn't. But we're searching after satisfaction. We're searching after something to make us whole. And this is a God-given thing. God's actually created sexuality between one man and one woman in marriage as something for intimate joy. He's designed it for giving in a way that says to another person, I'm belonging completely, exclusively, and permanently to you. And that's something you can only say in marriage between one man and one woman. See, when you talk about any type of sexual activity outside of marriage, it actually cheapens the permanency and the intimacy of that. And when you talk about sex outside of just a man and a woman, it cheapens the physical expression of what God... See, here's the beautiful thing. God actually wants to have like a whole, complete picture for you. And anytime you wander outside of that, it starts to devalue and change the expression. And he says, I have greater joys. And all other forms devalue this. And so it's not just a physical expression. It's not supposed to be about how we even identify. You know, when it comes to sexuality, like that's a big thing within our culture as to how we just identify as a person. And it makes me sad because God so deeply wants us to be having something that identifies us in something so much greater than our sexuality. And oftentimes we settle for something so small like that. And he wants us to get such a grander picture of who we actually are. See, when God says don't, he's also saying, I have something better for you. Most of the time when you hear talk in church about sexuality or anything like that, it's just like, no, don't. When the Bible, the picture the Bible actually paints is, no. I actually have something better for you. I want you to trust me on it. I know you're looking for satisfaction in your life. But society pushes us to say, get satisfaction. If you feel it, just do it. And David had deep desires that he really felt. And here's the reality. We have deep desires too. And God's given us desires for attraction, desires for other people. And those are God-given things. But what happens is sin taints them. And whether it's attraction to the opposite sex, to the same sex, or you're not even sure about how you feel even about your own sexuality, I want to say this. We want this to be a place where you can talk openly through that. Through your feelings and your desires. We want you to be honest here about even how you feel. Because your feelings and the desires that you're feeling, they're real. They're really there. And I know society says church is a terrible place to talk through them, but society basically says, well, just give in to them. And God's saying, no, I don't want you to look inward for hope. I want to offer a better way. Where you don't have to be controlled and even defined by your desires. That your identity doesn't even have to come from your desires. Where you don't have to be fulfilled through your desires. Let me give you an example. For some of you, you've probably seen this before. See, what happens is God, this is like our life right here. All right? And we want to be fulfilled. And this doesn't even have to do with sexuality. Like, it can be with anything, right? But even in terms of sexuality, like, we want to be fulfilled. And we fill up, we fill up, we fill up.
Whoa.
But because we have sin, guess what happens? We're tainted, we're cracked, we're broken. We know that. But what happens to the fulfillment?
You lose it.
You lose it. You need a little more. You need a little more. You need a little more. And we keep searching for this. We keep searching for this. We keep searching for this. And the search isn't wrong. And the desire to be fulfilled isn't wrong. Like, that's actually God-given. He wants us to be fulfilled. The problem is we go searching in areas to where it's like we're searching in areas with cracked cups. And God says that in Jesus actually gives his life for us. And when we trust him and give our lives over to him, the Bible actually says he gives us his life. So that as we are starting to find our desires in him, instead of it just running out on us all the time, we can actually be fulfilled far greater than fulfilling any of those desires could be. And the cool part with Jesus is as we get filled up with him, instead of it cracking, it overflows.
Cup runneth over.
You see how some of those Bible terms actually paint a picture? That when God's saying, listen, don't, he's not saying it because he's like, oh, I just don't want you to have any fun. He's like, I actually want you to have more fun. But the fun that you're looking for, the joy that you're looking for, it's good for a little while, but it's cracked. The end of verse 19 and verse 20, it says, you are not your own, you were bought at a price. Most of the time people look at that negatively. Oh, you're bought with a price. Like, Jesus sacrificed himself. He's like, I want you. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. He's saying you don't have to do this alone. There's freedom beyond the control of your desires. There's satisfaction beyond even what your desires long for. That God always wants more for you than even what you are looking for. That's the message of the Bible. And so there's always forgiveness. There's always life. That if there's been mistreatment, that you've been mistreated and you've been victimized. That God says, I have my arms open to you. If you have stumbled and you have fallen, God says, I have my arms open to you. You know, one of the things that, as I've talked with some of our students from past years, one of the things that they said that they missed, and they wish that we talked about it more, was just that we could talk about this topic more. Because so many of them dealt with it. In a room this size, my guess is many of you have had to deal with it in one way, shape, or form. And let's not let this be a place that we can't be honest with ourselves and with each other. And so I want to leave you with this. Be honest with yourself and honor God with your body. I could have said body, but you'll remember all of that.
God.
Be honest with yourself. Honor God with your body. Treat each other like family. This is what 1 Timothy chapter 5. Paul urges Timothy. He says, treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. In other words, like in dating relationships, you know, you should treat the other person as if they're your sister. You should always ask yourself, if you're a guy, all right, if you're a guy, you should ask yourself, would I do this with my sister? And God says that is how you should treat them. If you're a girl and that's a guy that you're with, you should ask yourself, would I do this with my brother? And God says that's how you should treat them.